Okay, so quick, quick, quick review, hopefully. I'm going to breeze through this tonight. I thought, well, we'll do some more memory work together, but I'm going to, uh, I guess, observe the Passover on that, just pass right over. But I hope that you are taking the challenge and trying to commit text to memory. Again, not for the sake of seeing if, what sort of working state your short-term memory is. This is much, much longer term. We're hitting for distance here. We're about writing the text on our heart, and most of all, the meaning of the text. That's what's most important. All right, so in Daniel 1, we were introduced, of course, to the key players in this book, many of them anyway. King Nebuchadnezzar, of course, figures prominently. Daniel, of course, and his three friends. There are other characters scattered here and there through the text. We'll be introduced to another new figure tonight named Arioch. But mostly we're introduced to Daniel. We're introduced to the quality of his character and that of his friends. But most of all, why God has raised them up for this moment, much as He has a Joseph or an Esther or other figures in history. God has brought these young men, allowed them to be tested in a very difficult way, more than maybe they ever imagined they would be, for greater things, for the sake of ultimately His purpose through Christ. That's where all of this is heading, right? As Phil prayed about our understanding of the Old Testament, that's where all of this is leading. It's leading to the incarnation of Christ. It's leading to the cross. Daniel, in some ways, mirrors certainly Christ in some ways. One of those being from the tribe of Judah, to say nothing of his character. So we talked about these young men and their resolve and their faithfulness and God's blessing them. And of course, that is going to set the stage now for what happens in chapter 2. How much time has passed between chapters 1 and 2? It wouldn't appear that a long time has passed. As we open up to Daniel 2, we see that it is the second year of the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar. We know that Daniel and his friends were subject to a 3-year training period, and depending upon the counting convention you use here, you could make the case that these young men had in fact completed their 3 years, parts of 3 different years, and yet it still be the second year of King Nebuchadnezzar, or this episode here in chapter 2 falls during the training period, when Daniel's God-given ability to interpret dreams will be used in a very great way. So I want us to begin this evening simply by thinking about two of the key figures in this chapter. Of course, with the lens we're looking at this entire study through is God rules in the kingdoms of men, in the kingdoms of humankind. He bestows power on whomever He wills. So, with that in view, let's think first about King Nebuchadnezzar. And I would like to hear from you in terms of the traits that we are introduced to beginning in chapter 2. We're not really told a lot about him, the man. We're told that there was a king named Nebuchadnezzar, a victorious conqueror, who is exerting his control and trying to establish control of the kingdom here in the opening weeks and months of his reign. But beyond that, we're not told much about him personally, but now we see him interacting with people. We get a glimpse of the inside of his kingdom, of his style of leadership, if you will. And so we begin to see some of his traits. We learn something of his temperament. So talk to me about what you see in Nebuchadnezzar. Pick some adjectives that you think would describe him. And we can just do it casually. If you'd like to make a lengthier comment, we'd sure like to get that on the microphone, so raise your hand, please. Harsh. Could be very harsh, okay? Very demanding. When he has something in his mind that he wants, he is going to insist on it. He's going to flex every ounce of power that he has to get his way, to the point of being harsh and in his demands to get it. How else would you describe this man? Okay. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any halfway with him. You're either going to have this amazing reward or be torn limb from limb. So your words were drastic or extreme. I can buy that. Yeah, whatever he does, he doesn't mess around. Okay, tell me more.
He's smart enough to know that if his wise men or dream tellers are not able to tell him the dream and its meaning, that, if he tells them the dream up front, well, you can just make up anything.
Yeah.
He's smart enough to know if you're for real, you can tell me the dream itself.
Yeah.
And then also, whenever Daniel is right, he is smart enough to promote this guy,
Yeah.
So he is, and then of course later on, obviously he shows some lack of wisdom in some times, but whenever he comes to realizations, he tends to do the right thing. He tends to honor God in certain places when he is made aware of his own shortcomings.
Yeah.
And so I do actually see some wisdom in there.
There is some wisdom, and even, dare I say, with that humility, which I think you've alluded to. But yeah, very cunning. I mean, he starts out, as history tells us, as this victorious general. So, I mean, you got to have a degree of smarts to get where he's gotten. So, heritage aside, he knows how to handle himself. He's a man of his word, both good and bad. Not one to be trifled with. Would not appear to, back to Jesse's point, would not be, you hear the expression today, does not suffer fools easily. I think that would probably apply to Nebuchadnezzar. He can make the day as long for you as there are letters in his name. He's just a ruthless guy. What else do you think of when you think of Nebuchadnezzar? He was troubled. Boy, I'm glad you brought that up. He had his own problems. In this case, the chapter starts out, he's got big trouble, right? I can't make up my mind if he has forgotten what the dream actually is, and it could be an issue. And I've often thought this, Jesse, what you said about, he's wise and cunning to know that if he just spells out the dream, then anybody can declare an interpretation. I've read it suggested maybe he actually even forgot the dream. So no way to prove that. But to your point, Elizabeth, he's troubled. There's language in here about that. There's in the New American Standard the word anxious. Does it say his sleep left him? Yeah, verse 1, his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. Many of us can relate on some level to that. You've been troubled enough where sleep has left you. And we're not sure how long this goes on, right? Is this a matter of weeks that he's having the same dream, the same experience? But, or maybe it happens one time. I kind of lean toward the former, Where, I mean, at some point, it's like something's got to give, right? I got to get some sleep. Other thoughts about Nebuchadnezzar. We sure do learn a lot about him, don't we? And I think this is helpful to go through because he's going to be an instrument of God to bring about his purpose. Jesse? No, you're okay.
And then he's also extremely arrogant. When you especially the story with the statue and all the different parts, and then the next chapter, what is he doing? Making a statue of himself that's entirely gold. No, I'm not going to be gold just a head and be temporary. No,
Exactly
I'm going to
right.
be forever, even though God says I'm
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, the head of gold dream goes to his head. That's exactly right. I put down his temper. That's what you said, basically. Impulsive was another adjective I put down. Those are kind of close cousins, right? That's a bad combination, frankly. It's like there's this capacity for, his emotions, not to move ahead too much here, but I always think in chapter 3, boy, that furnace is fitting. That furnace just matches this king, doesn't it? Because that's his emotional spectrum. It's from 0 to 100 like that at the drop of a hat. Don't cross this guy or he's going to crank up the furnace 7 times hotter. So, all right, anything else? What do we learn about Nebuchadnezzar? Nolan? Yeah, go ahead and say that again on the mic for us there. Yeah. Okay. So Nolan says that he was impatient, and as soon as they couldn't provide what he's demanded, that's it, right? Done with them. And I want you to think about this. How disposable were wise men in the Babylonian Empire? It's almost, what's he going to do? Start over? Does he have a? I suppose that maybe the 3-year training program was a regular thing in the land. He keeps the B team, has them in the simulator, as it will, and if he's done with Group A, then he just brings in the backups. I don't know. All right, so he's got a temper. He's emotional. Every bit as subject, though, to God moving his heart as anyone else. God has him in his hand. Remember that expression? God gave Jehoiakim into his hand. Well, what that means is that everything is in God's hand. He is subject to God moving his heart. He's anxious, impulsive, impatient, violent, loyal, I guess on some level, as long as you help him. Wise, can be humbled, and in a strange sort of way, tender-hearted. He can be easily touched. I find that striking. Now, of course, all of this God knows. And he's just a master orchestrator here. He's going to use this king and all of his strengths and weaknesses and all of his foibles and all of his tendencies, and he's going to use Daniel and his friends as he continues. Again, I don't know if I've offered this publicly. Sometimes we study the subject of God's providence. I actually find God's providence just utterly amazing, maybe even more so than miracles, right? Because with a miracle, obviously that's a big flex on God's part. He suspends the very natural law he created. But with providence, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost as if God says, hey, I'll allow myself to be constrained by the very forces I've created, and then watch what I can do. He can just intervene, use the inclinations of people to bring about precisely what he wills. Okay, so let's pivot now, of course, to our main character, and that is Daniel. And we see more about Daniel in this text, don't we? We've already had a good helping of exposure to his faith and his character. Tell me what else you see in Daniel here in chapter 2. He had access to the king. Okay? Yeah. To ask for, are you referring to when he asked for time? Yeah.
Not everybody had access to this guy.
Yeah. So he has a degree of boldness, right? He has access by God's good hand. Steve, got the mic right here.
Daniel also has a calming effect.
Has a what?
Calming
effect.
He always has a measured response, very carefully considered.
That's a good point. And it's like he lowers the temperature in the room for everybody. I mean, that's a really good point. Think back to chapter 1, right? And a couple of you helped me get the chronology right here from chapter 1. But, I mean, basically here are people whose neck is on the line. If they don't perform, if they don't deliver for Nebuchadnezzar, we've established what he's like. Off with your head, as they say. You're done. And so you can imagine that sort of working environment could be just a bit stressful. And all, I mean, not being flippant here, I'm just saying Daniel has this ability to, he's so, regardless of his age, he's the adult in the room, isn't he? And just calm. Okay, we need to do this. I need you three to seek God's favor as I go to him in prayer. And hey, would you consider this alternative? Let's just do a 10-day trial. Low risk, right? Calm. I really appreciate you saying that. I had not thought of that. Nisi? No, it's okay. Thank you, Donovan. Appreciate it.
I was thinking along similar lines, just that he doesn't panic in a crisis. People's lives are at stake, and he cares about those lives, and he trusts in the Lord. He knows God will be with him, but it takes time to hear from the Lord, so he asks for it.
Yep. Very calm, doesn't panic. It's born out of a faith. Donovan, we have another comment right here, just up here, Brother Kyle.
Well, he was obviously persuasive in the sense that in chapter 1, when the edict is to kill all the wise men, it says they went looking for Daniel and his brethren too.
Yeah.
And so he has this audience with Nebuchadnezzar, and the conclusion that he comes to, like the narrator here says in 20th verse, as for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in his realm. So he was persuasive and effective, and he obviously had the skill to do that.
Yeah. And I also appreciate, that's a good point. The other adjective I like that you used, Steve, was the word measured. Boy, what we can learn from Daniel about being measured in speech, especially, Brother Kyle, to your point, 2:13, the decree goes forth that the wise men should be slain, and they look for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Now, we learned the name of the individual assigned with this gruesome task. His name is Arioch. And so, fair to say, this is a pivotal, tense moment. Would I have the wherewithal to speak in this fashion to the person assigned to kill me? Verse 14, Daniel replies with, my Bible says, discretion and discernment. I just can't, I have no words for that other than wow. So I obviously part of what God has blessed Daniel with is it's not just wisdom and understanding about visions, it's wisdom and understanding about people. And we can learn a lot from Daniel here. Obviously, his prayer is impressive for several reasons. His compass is always pointing toward God. A moment of crisis, Daniel's compass points, his spiritual north is, okay, we need to get on our knees here. We need compassion from God. More than I need compassion from Arioch, more than I need compassion from Nebuchadnezzar, I need compassion from God. Let's see if, and you realize that in doing all of this, he doesn't just save his life or the life of his three friends. He saves the lives of all of these other people who at varying times ended up proving themselves to be enemies of him and his friends. Tried to eliminate them. Chapter 3, there's an accusation against the three friends. Much, much later, obviously, but chapter 6, people of this ilk are found plotting against Daniel. And yet Daniel is selfless and sacrificial. He's going to put himself on the line, to approach the king, to the point that was made earlier. Verse 16, to go in and request of the king that he would give him time. So, don't let it get lost. I mean, while this is indeed a book of visions, it is also a book of prayer. Right? We remember chapter 2 largely for the vision about the statue, which we're going to give some coverage to here very soon. Chapters, 7 through the end of study those visions. We're going to talk about all of those and wrestle with the details of that language. But I'm trying to remember if it's 9 or 10. I think it's 9. There's just more impressive things about Daniel and the prayer that features there. Just so much that we can learn from that. Okay. So now we deal with this dream. I'm going to trust you're very familiar with what happens here. God reveals, of course, verse 19, the mystery to Daniel in a night vision. Interesting, I've been doing some reading in Ephesians and Colossians. You'll find that same kind of language. The idea of a mystery being revealed. Obviously, in those other contexts, mystery is referring to the gospel. But just interesting that language is used in the Old Testament. Daniel blesses the Lord. I commend that prayer to you. Always, you can't go wrong with using a prayer of praise and making it your own. Use a biblical prayer. It informs our language in the prayer closet. And so Daniel, after receiving answer, goes back to Arioch, reports to him, says, call off the execution, don't destroy the wise men, take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. I find it impressive yet again, Daniel has influence with a person that has been assigned to kill him. He's had wielded influence with people who have been placed over him, who, with many other people, might have just said, "Who are you? You're a peon. Don't talk to me. Just do what I say." And Daniel's, there's a lot that has happened here we're not made privy to, but Daniel has forged relationships here, and we can learn from that as well. It gives us wisdom in these tense, troubled times, I believe. And so finally, he's presented before the king. Verse 26, are you able to make known the dream? And something before Daniel gets into the dream, what is one of the key things that Daniel points out about this interpretation in terms of its origin? It is from God. And boy, is he abundantly clear about that. He goes to great pains to say, look, because we know, the method of these kings, Belshazzar is going to do this later, and I'm going to lavish all these rewards for you. And Daniel said, just keep it. I don't want it, because the credit doesn't go to me; it goes to the revealer of mysteries. Verse 28: there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Boy, how that points to our theme in this book. He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. Verse 30, he doubles down. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me, for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man. Would I say that? But for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. What humility. Okay, so here's the dream. By the way, we would point out, this humiliation of the king's wise men earlier in the chapter, I think, serves God's purpose, doesn't it? If for no other reason than to identify the clear gulf that exists between the wisdom of God and the wisdom of men. And so that's an important, we've kind of skipped over that, but we'll just mention that in passing. We've already noted his request for understanding granted. That also plays a big part here. But then as we get into the significance of the statue and, of course, the stone that struck it, you have this image in your lesson material, I believe. Of course, the head of gold. We're just going to run through this because if you've studied this at all, you know what answers are going to pop up here. The head of gold refers to, and there's no controversy about this. The text identifies. Who does he say is the head of gold? Nebuchadnezzar specifically. So the Babylonian Empire would be represented by the head of gold. By the way, any thoughts about the materials of construction here? I think I asked something about that, and and then as I'm reflecting on it, I think, well, what would I say about that? Obviously, gold excels. There's a degree of excellence here, like a scale of excellence. So maybe these subsequent kingdoms would become less and less superior. So he's not just predicting a sequence or a succession of world empires, but also something about their nature and something about their manner and something about their quality. That alone could just be maybe a whole series of studies. The chest and arms of silver will be the Medes and the Persians. Now some have speculated, well, maybe one is the Medes and then the next part is the Persians. But in this book, you'll find the Medes and Persians spoken of together, chapter 5, chapter 8, the Medes and the Persians. Some have suggested the fact that, this is a part of the statue where there are two of something, two arms. One would represent maybe the Medes and the other the Persians. I wouldn't be dogmatic about that. The belly and thighs of bronze would refer then, and by the way, we conclude this based upon other visions within the book of Daniel as well. So we have the Greek Empire represented by the belly and thighs of bronze, and then you have the belly. Sorry, I didn't change my text. Personal foul on Mark. That should say legs of iron, right? Legs of iron. I had the feet right. I was having fun with the font color. Feet of iron and clay. So it's the legs of iron. Now, what empire is that speaking of? Roman Empire. Roman Empire. And in verse 40, we are told that in the days of those kings, verse 44, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. That's, we focus on the statue, but the most critical part of this dream is the stone that is cut out without hands. It strikes the statue where? In the feet, right? Which pinpoints the timing as to when this stone that would become a mountain would emerge. In fact, that's spelled out in the text I just read in verses 44 and 45. What will then happen with this stone? It will strike the statue and crush and put an end to every part of the statue, but then the stone itself will what? Well, it will last forever, but it will grow into a huge mountain, and it will, as Brother Kyle said, will last forever. Verse 40, let's just read a few verses. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. So you have the strength, the hardness of an iron, but then you also have this lack of unity and, dare I say, elements of brittleness that are created by the presence of this clay, in that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom. So there's division, there is weakness, yes, the toughness of iron, but verse 42, some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And so in the day, as he's talking about those kings in verse 44, he identifies in the days of those kings, clearly referring to the fourth kingdom, he will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And then verse 45, inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So what does the stone represent? I should have put that on the slide. Christ and, I think, kingdom. The kingdom of God. He's talking about the rule of God here. The church would be the citizenry of that kingdom. But he's here talking about the kingdom of God. And that it will endure forever. Give me a moment here. Yeah, verse 35. This is the statement I was looking for earlier. But the stone, end of 35, but the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain. And then this statement, and filled the whole earth. So this will be a global mountain of strength, a global kingdom, a universal kingdom. And that fits with everything we're told about the kingdom in the prophets. Yes, sir.
One of the things I think is worth mentioning is that when John the Baptist is noted in Matthew 3 as a man sent from God, preaching the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and then in that same chapter, in the 17th verse, it says Jesus Christ comes preaching the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Yep.
And then you go to the fourth chapter of John in the 23rd verse, and it says that Jesus went through the villages and the cities of Galilee preaching the gospel of the kingdom.
Yeah, well said. We also have the book of Mark. I had down Mark 1, 14 and 15. You know, the time is fulfilled. The kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. So there's a connection between the gospel and in the language of John, the gospel of the kingdom. So that's all tied together. Mark 9 and verse 1, the kingdom will come with power in that generation. Acts chapter 1. So we can note a number of different places where we see indeed the kingdom came in the days of the Roman Empire, just as was predicted in the time of Daniel, and just as John and Jesus and others proclaimed in the first century. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. The first and the eighth Beatitudes speak of the,
Going to look like in the kingdom.
Yeah.
And I just think it's remarkable from a historical standpoint, the mission of God and how he was going to do it. is made known, maybe more to us than even at that time.
Yeah.
But it's certainly impressive.
Yeah, very much so. So this is powerful witness to the authenticity of the Bible, the inspiration of the Scriptures. So many blessings that come to us through this text. So, in fact, to that point, let's touch on a couple of other things here with the remaining minutes that we have. Let's zoom back down and just talk about the importance of Daniel 2 just to the rest of the book of Daniel. What importance would you assign to Daniel 2 just in view of the rest of the book of Daniel?
Friends also are leaders in the nation. The last verse, 49, says, Daniel requested the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So it's very, very important. What it highlights what God is doing here. This is all the working of God. He has raised up these people who are not Babylonians. As we begin the book, they are very, very young, and as chapter 2, they're not much older than they were in chapter 1, and yet God is elevating them to a position of influence that He's going to use throughout the rest of this book. We're told at the end of chapter 1, almost as kind of an advanced declaration of here's what you're going to see in the book of Daniel, that this Daniel will continue until the first year of Cyrus the king. What happens in chapter 2 marks a pivotal occurrence, or an important occurrence, in that coming to pass. So there's the declaration up front, which I think is appropriate because God is, here's what's going to happen, and then we're just made privy to how He has served to bring this about. And also Daniel's friends. Do you see this Daniel 2 setting the stage for Daniel 3? I hope that you do. The very last verse of chapter 2, what does Daniel ask? He's been placed in charge of the province of Babylon. Well, if you're going to be placed in charge of something, you'd want people you can trust working for you. And so who better than 3 young men that are friends to whom God has granted supernatural ability? Yeah, let's get these 3 involved. And so that's going to set the table for what happens in chapter 3, because clearly that move rubs some people the wrong way. Okay? Other thoughts about Daniel 2 with reference to the rest of the book of Daniel? We'll go ahead and wait for the mic. Donovan's been doing yeoman's work. I appreciate you, brother. Getting your workout tonight.
Like you said earlier, it establishes that Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, and then as you go through the book, you're going to see in chapter 8 there's a he-goat that's going to come along and destroy another one. So it kind of helps you to set in order who's the next kingdom, and that helps in the rest of the book.
This sets forth all the history from Babylon until the days of the Roman Empire, and then some of these other visions are going to deal with portions of that, maybe, and this is just more of a broad declaration. But yeah, this sets the table for the study of all of those other visions This sets the stage, as Jesse mentioned, for what's going to happen in chapter 3. I mean, there's a clear tie. I appreciate him pointing that out between the head of the statue in 2 and the entire statue of 3. So knowing what the statues are made of, that's important to know. Jim?
Yeah, there's not much said about here about Daniel's upbringing or the upbringing of his friends.
Right.
But you have to imagine that he had a very good upbringing. And
You would
so
think.
I think there's at least a subliminal between the lines message there
The parents.
about what parents and grandparents can do to prepare the next generation for any turmoil or issues or
Really good.
things are going to happen, in
Yeah.
the future. I mean, I think it's not hard to figure out that things aren't going to be maybe like they were when you and I were our kids' ages. So they need to be prepared. And then also in chapter 1, verse 8, it says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself." And then one verse later, it says, "And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs." I think there's a point there, kind of a meta, overarching point that we can think about. And that is, I can't get away from this idea when you talk about providence, that when we step up, God steps in, right? When we have the courage, as Daniel did here.
The order is important.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm looking at
Yeah.
here, is that you'll notice that when Daniel resolved, God gave favor and compassion. So that just kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, good point. Good point. All right. So I guess one other thing. Hopefully we can see the importance of Daniel 2, obviously, to the rest of the Bible, right? We've already kind of discussed that a little bit, our understanding of the kingdom of God. Daniel 2 is an important text in helping our understanding of certainly the timing of when the kingdom would come, the nature of the kingdom. It's of divine origin. It's made without hands. And so, we have that whole dimension of the study of the statue here in Daniel 2. Our understanding of the expression "the last days" or "the last times." And you look at that language in the Old Testament, and then look at in the New Testament, like in Hebrews chapter 1, "in these last days has spoken to us in his Son," Hebrews 1, verse 2. So, 1 Peter 1, "in these last times," I think he uses the expression. So Daniel can become a launching point into a study of some broad, important biblical themes, certainly. Aaron.
So much of the Old Testament up to the point of Daniel, the law and the prophets, points to exile. Moses talks about it in Deuteronomy, that when you serve other gods, that you're going to be exiled.
Yep.
And then the prophets come along, and they warn the people repeatedly of the possibility of exile if they don't turn and serve the Lord. The people continually refuse to turn and serve the Lord, and so at last they're exiled. Here we are now in Daniel. Daniel is the gateway to the rest of history, because Daniel then sets forth the pattern where you have these empires that are then crushed by the stone, that this is the pattern that's going to be throughout the rest of history. Even though those are the empires that are named, that's the same cyclical pattern that we find throughout the rest of the 2,000 years of history since then.
Yeah. And I think of what he would say to the Israelites, that you're not all that, essentially, right? You're not mighty, you're not strong. I didn't choose you because of that. And yet, through that, God will establish a kingdom that will be greater than, that will emerge victorious, that will endure forever. And so there's that noticeable contrast as well. Good thought. All right, we'll end with that. Go ahead and be picking up. We'll start with this packet, God willing, next week.